1 in 3 adults in America are lonely.
With disconnection at an all-time high, building meaningful relationships can be a challenge. Is that just because we aren't really building real connections?
I think we just live in the default. And our default settings are oftentimes not programmed to our benefit.
Relatability and communication expert Rachel DeAlto is on Intentional Living with Courtney Myers.
I know as humans, our goal in this world, our purpose in this world is to connect with other people.
Sharing with us the keys to authentic connection.
We don't even realize that we're being inauthentic. So it really is that first step is that self-awareness of who am I?
The ultimate fix for loneliness.
The antidote to loneliness is connection.
And how to find alignment with our highest self.
It's figuring out what makes you happy. And then everything else kind of falls into place.
On an all-new Intentional Living with Courtney Myers. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Myers, a podcast dedicated to those seeking a more fulfilled and purposeful life through thought-provoking conversation, spiritual exploration, and authentic connections. The intentional movement has begun, and if you found yourself here, you are a part of it. Intentional Living with Courtney Myers starts now. Hi, Rachel. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Myers. I am so excited and happy to talk to you today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Well, you are an expert and highly sought after to talk about this concept of authenticity and connection. Now, I know it's a big topic. I know it's a big buzzword. I know a lot of people are talking about it right now, but there's a reason for that because we are really disconnected from each other. In a world that is so connected, we do find ourselves being quite disconnected. And I wonder why, because I know you've spoken a lot about like we put on all these masks and we can filter ourselves so much, but even when we decide that we want to remove them, I feel like we have a hard time finding that authenticity within ourselves. Not only is there a fear of showing up as who we are, but like it's hard to like even understand who we are for ourselves, let alone show it to the world. So like, where do you stand on that? Like, how do we really start to be more authentic in this world so that we can have stronger, real connections?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head because it really all starts with ourselves. And if we don't have the self-awareness, if we don't have that moment, that beat to say, let me just try to figure out who I am before I start pretending to be someone else, then we end up in a position where 20 years down the line, you're looking in the mirror and you're like, I don't even know who I am. So really that self-reflection is such an important first step in figuring out what makes me happy? What are my priorities? How do I enjoy showing up in the world? What really, when I'm in the world, when I'm interacting with people, what is the part of me that feels the most alive? And so if we're not actually paying attention to that, then all of a sudden, we don't even realize that we're being inauthentic. So it really is that first step is that self-awareness of who am I? And recognizing that it's okay if you haven't quite spent the time to figure that out yet.
Well, I feel like even that question of who am I, it is so like complex because we create who we are by these stories we tell about ourselves or by what the outside world is responding to with us. And so it is not as simple as like, even in therapy, they'll ask you like, what do you like to do? And sometimes it's like, I don't know, because we fill our days and we fill ourselves up with so much stuff that we don't take that time to really sit down and get to know ourselves. That's why actually the very, very first episode of this whole podcast, I talk about taking yourself out on a date so you can start to get to know yourself, almost like asking yourself those first date questions. Because like you said, we can go 20 years of pretending to be someone or being a different person in different areas of our life that we actually lose touch with who we truly are.
Absolutely. And the fact is that we end up in these situations where we have different versions of ourselves. And then we're thinking, oh my gosh, do I have to be the same person in every situation? And so a lot of times, when I'm talking about this with an audience that is in the corporate world, they're like, wait a second, I can't show up here with my colleagues the same way that I will with my best friend at the bar. And no, but we do have versions of our authenticity that can be in every situation. So yes, we do have all of these, it's kind of like slices of the onion and some people get to see the very center of you and some people get those outside layers, but those outside layers still have to be you. Because what I see so often is that when you aren't showing up as yourself, when you aren't at least, really identifying with this is a version of myself that feels real, then it's just exhausting. I think that's why a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people don't enjoy networking. They don't enjoy meeting new people because they feel like they have to be fake. And then
Yeah.
when you realize, like, if you're in that position of this is who I am, kind of take it or leave it, I'm really allowing myself to show up as real, then everything gets a little bit easier. But it's so true that we think that authenticity is like one version of ourselves. Well, I am not the same person throughout the day. There's 18 different versions of me, but they're all versions of the real me. And that's where that disconnect happens, where we get tired and we really want to kind of go within because it just doesn't feel right.
But that is scary. I mean, it is really scary. And that's what I think I find the most is we do want to put on these masks because not only do we not know who we are authentically because we don't know ourselves on the inside and we're not actually getting honest with ourselves, like then we're faced with things like, self-acceptance or judgment or, what are they going to think about me? That comes into play so much. I know for me, in college, I experienced this so much. It should be a time where you should come out with like these lifelong wonderful friends. And I was in a sorority and I went to a big school and, but I was so uncertain as to my place in this environment that, I would use alcohol to mask myself and make myself feel comfortable. I developed a major anxiety. And it was actually like, it stemmed from probably like sixth grade when one of my best friends moved away and I was so close with her. And then I was always trying to fit in. And there was this constant cycle of like trying to fit in, even with a friend group. And I came out of college where I should have had my lifelong wonderful friends. And I didn't because I was never myself. And I can reflect back now and be like, of course I wasn't going to make great friends. You can smell someone being inauthentic from a mile away. Your energy, it doesn't lie. Like you can't hide it if you are being fake. So it is scary though, because you wonder like, are they going to like me? So how do we get past that fear so that we can show up and really truly build that kind of a connection authentically?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the fear of rejection is real. It is real in
Yeah.
every situation, every social situation, every professional situation. Anytime that you are building a relationship, there is naturally a fear of rejection. So just validating that it's okay to be afraid. And what I see
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes is we'll put on those masks because if they reject that person, they didn't actually reject me. So it's a little bit safer. And so when we think about it, we have to be able to take those baby steps because one thing is like if you build that connection, if you actually start a relationship with someone and you're not showing up as yourself, they're not
Yeah.
actually liking you. They're liking this
Mm-hmm.
version of you. So you have to reconcile that enough to give yourself the momentum to just take it like one step at a time. Fear is something that you need to defeat in your brain. And the way that I see this happening from a psychological perspective is you have to prove your brain wrong. In layman's terms, you just have to prove your brain wrong that this is not the result. So the end result of me showing up as myself is not getting rejected every time. Granted, like I just did a video on this the other day where it's like, not everybody has to be friends. Like we don't have to get
Yeah.
along with everyone. We don't have to become friends with everyone. But there are going to be people that like you for you. And so the more that you put yourself out there as yourself, and then you get that positive affirmation of, wow, this person is actually interested in me for me, then all of a sudden our brain thinks, wow, I'm not going to die by putting myself out there because our
Mm.
brain doesn't distinguish the difference between this is a threat to my survival or it's a threat to my ego.
Isn't that funny that like our brain doesn't like really like distinguish those two? Because I've talked about like being in fight or flight or that survival mode a lot on the show. And it seems like we are just always constantly going there, even with things like showing up as ourselves or whatever it may be, like making a change, a positive change in our life to be healthier, like all these different things. We are working against ourselves always. And that is such a challenge. So like we have to learn to break that fear down and it is just uncomfortable. And we are so wired not to go there. Like we are so wired not to be comfortable. And it's almost like, are we just too cushy in this world that like we can't push ourselves? Like, what is it?
I think it's part of it. It's very easy to avoid the fear. It's very easy to avoid the
Yeah.
challenge. It's easy to, because there is a comfort in that. But I think I know as humans, our goal in this world, our purpose in this world is to connect with other people. And so for me,
Yeah.
there is no greater purpose. There's no greater motivation than connection to push yourself out of your comfort zone. Because I guarantee you, there is someone listening to the show that is thinking, I'm lonely. Because the
Mm.
statistics don't lie. 1 in 3 adults in America are lonely. So 1 in 3 people, that doesn't, and if it's not you, then it's 2 people that you know.
Yeah.
There's people everywhere. And so the antidote to loneliness is connection. And so there's nothing more worthwhile. There's nothing worth fighting that fear more for than building a relationship.
But isn't that interesting? You could be surrounded by people, or we can be so connected with things like social media, or just like, I'm talking to people all over the world. Technically we are really connected, but we aren't. Like, you can be surrounded by so many, yet still feel that loneliness. And like, is that just
Yeah.
because we aren't really building real connections?
Well, so there's all different versions of connections, and the research shows that, we can have all of these kind of surface level friends. You can have up to, I don't even know what the last data, whether it's 100 or whatever it is in terms of very surface level relationships that you can maintain. But really the ones that really feed our soul, the ones that allow us to feel a lack of loneliness, are the ones that are deeper. They're the people that you can go to when you have a hard time going on, when you have something to celebrate. It's people who feel support and emotional support that are able to feel like a deeper connection. And so we can be connected. There's a million people I'm connected with on social media.
Yeah.
I don't know the name of their dog, and that's a disservice to me because I should know their dogs. But there's so many people that we have this like very surface level relationship with. And the truth is that so it's interesting. I did a lot of research on social media for my thesis, and a lot of it shows that you can it's like taking a Tylenol for a brain tumor. Like, it's going to feel a little bit better. You're going to feel a little bit better than lonely, but you're not going to get to the root of it. You're not going to solve the issue if you're just connecting on social media. So we have to have these deeper relationships.
I mean, that is so true, that getting to the root of anything. And I feel like everyone I speak to, it's like we have to get to the root of whatever the quote unquote issue is, whether that's connecting more or being healthier or, dealing with our anxiety, all these things. And we so often are just like prescribing, like you said, a Tylenol, a pill, some quick fix for it. So it's like, okay, I have a million friends on social media. I'm not lonely, yet like we don't have that true connection. But a lot of times, even when we have faced such, like when we have put up so many masks and shown up so differently in our life in so many different ways, it is hard to actually change those relationships that you have, even if you think of them as closer relationships, to show up who you are. Because once you start doing the work to understand who you are authentically, you will be making changes in your life, and that does affect your relationships.
Yes. And so we have an evolution. So there's no one who shows up on this earth, and especially or gets to adulthood, and from adulthood to death does not evolve a million times. And so do your relationships. And that's something, sometimes it's hard to hear for people because, I know a lot of people that have the same best friends since grammar school. Well, you probably don't have the same connection with all of those friends as you did feel when you were in grammar school. Like, all of your evolutions matter. And so it doesn't mean that you can, I'm like going to sing a Girl Scout song now. We had this thing in Girl Scouts where it's like, make new friends, but keep the old.
Oh my goodness, yes. One is silver and the other is gold.
Yeah.
Yes.
So wow. I mean, mnemonic devices and songs, they really do work. You remember that stuff forever. But it's the truth though. Like, you don't have to get rid of those friends, because that happens oftentimes where people are like, well, I've just outgrown them. Well, that's kind of cruel. You can still find, in any situation, even if you are, say you kind of just figured who you are. You figured out who you are, you take off the mask, and your relationship's not the same anymore. Well, guess what? You can rebuild that relationship based on the things that you still have in common. And then you can seek out additional relationships that can give you that feeling of true connection and true compatibility. And I talk about compatibility from a friendship and a romantic level.
So, I mean, when we're like saying, okay, we've been friends forever, we've been friends since grade school, which is great, but are we holding on to that comfort, or are we holding on to those like feelings and emotions and not really the connection? It's more of like a nostalgia.
Yeah. There's like a legacy, I think, that happens
Yeah.
when you have these friends for 20 years. And listen, I know people that have really close friendships. Actually, my husband, his best friend is from when he was 13 years old, and they have a real friendship. Like they are kind of their
Yeah.
ride or die. Like they're like brothers, and that's amazing. But that's not always the case. That's not
Hmm.
always. And so I think it's okay to understand that those you're going to evolve, your relationships are going to evolve, and you're never too old, or you never have too many friends. That's the worst thing I
Yeah.
hear is like, I'm too old to make friends, or I have
Yes.
enough friends, I don't need a new friend. I'm like, guess what? You're a different person than you were 10 years ago. So maybe you want to expand your circle and see who you can connect with.
Well, I mean, you're a different person today than you were yesterday. I mean, something happened to you most likely in your day that
100%.
makes you think of something totally different today. And it doesn't have to be big or extreme. It might be, but it can be like a little thing can just
Yeah.
like your kid said something to you at school and it triggered something in you. And now all of a sudden you're looking at the world differently. But even like you're talking about having friends from that long a period, we have to also look at that from a romantic standpoint and when you're building a relationship because if you want a lifelong relationship you have to evolve together. So we need to look at all of our relationships in that way because look at how many people are like with their high school sweethearts. A lot of them are either unhappy in their relationship or get divorced because they're not evolving or growing together. And as human beings, we're constantly
Yeah.
growing. So it's the same thing with any sort of relationship, I think, whether it's a boss, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a partner. Like in life, we have to evolve. It could be your family. We have to allow each other that chance to evolve.
100%. And it's something that breaks my heart, especially in the divorce aspect or the unhappiness, because I do see it. I see it all the time with people where, they met when they were in their teens, and you are a completely different human at 40 than you were at 16. I hope so. But
Yeah.
if you're not evolving at the same rate, and you're not allowing people to have, if you don't give people the grace to catch
Mm.
up to you, or they don't give you the grace to catch up to you, then you both end up in a very difficult situation. And it's also why I see some really successful relationships start after, that 40. I think we don't figure
Yeah.
out who we are remotely until like 30. I was very confused. And now in my 40s, I'm like, oh, wow, we got this. And I see some really
Yeah.
interesting, significant relationships happen in those 40s because people are coming together as these people who kind of get it a little bit more. And yet, from a societal standpoint and from an wow, I can't say anthropology today.
I
You know what I'm
know.
going for there. But from
Anthropological.
from
Now I'm
anthropological,
questioning
I'm
it.
like, is that even a word?
I don't
Jeez,
know.
man. I was like, that's not what my degrees are in, so I'm good. But but anthropology shows that like we need to mate and we need to procreate at
Yeah.
these earlier ages, and so we're building families with people, and then all of a sudden realizing we've evolved out of it, and we've evolved out of this relationship. And it's very interesting from like a societal standpoint to understand, why we have a high divorce rate, why people, are afraid of doing the work too, because they're afraid of evolving outside of their partner.
Well, the psychology of it all, yes, we are pushed. So like young, get married, have your kids, do all this stuff. And I felt that pressure like crazy in my life. Like that was
Sure.
like what I needed to do. And it was just like one bad relationship after another. And I was, trying to make them work because like I wanted that. I needed to get married and have my family. Well, it turns out I didn't get married and have my first kid till I was 37. I'm 41 now. And I think like I'm just now actually understanding who I am. But it takes all those things along the way to allow us. But, if you think back to like our parents' generation, it was like you hit 40, you're over the hill. Like
Yeah.
we've evolved so much just even in that. But I agree with you. You don't really know who you are. If I was with the people I was with in my 20s or even early 30s, like I know I would not be happy. Thankfully, my husband and I met later. We met divine timing. We had both been through lots of failed relationships, lots of horrible situations, lots of therapy. So we've dealt with our shit, and then we can come together more evolved. And so, I mean, that is probably why when you see people getting together later, it's just because we understand who we are more and we're more confident in that and in who we are.
100%. Yes, that's why I see, listen, there's train wrecks at every age. Like,
Yeah.
let's be
Yes.
honest.
Yeah.
There's, but for the most part, if you have people who are emotionally mature and intelligent and they're getting together that, post 35 stage, all of a sudden you're like, wow, these people really they get each other and you have those
Yeah.
experiences. And yet we look at, but then we see situations like my parents are still together. They met when they were 18 years old. I think how old are they now? 72? I don't know. Probably shouldn't
Wow.
say this.
Yeah.
I was like, they're up there now. And like, that's a long time to still be with someone. And they're actually remotely happy. I was like, I say it from afar because I don't know every situation that they're in, but like,
Yeah.
they're happy. They love each other. And I'm like, it's a difficult thing. So I think,
Hmm.
everybody needs to give themselves, I use the word grace a lot because I think it really just encompasses what we need to provide ourselves with, because all we do that I see is beat ourselves up. We're constantly
Yes.
criticizing ourselves. We're constantly berating ourselves for things we did wrong or things we could have done differently or how I should be. And it's just unnecessary.
Well, I think we are our own worst critics. And then you also think about it. Like, I hate to also say that, like, at 20, you don't know yourself, because there are some 20-year-olds that do know themselves. Or to say at like 25, you don't have like a real voice or experience, because some people do. Some people do have that experience in
Sure.
their spirit, in their soul, whatever. So I hate, and that was like one thing I absolutely despised, as I was embarking on my career. Oh, you're young, you don't know. That's one of those like fighting back things. Now getting into your 40s, you're like, okay, I understand what they're saying, but I don't like to generalize and put that on people, because that is all a process of learning. And we have to go through those things at those stages
Yeah.
so that we can be well-rounded people when we get to 40, to really truly understand who we are. And, we're probably going to be different at 80 and in 40 more years. Like, how much more
I
confident
hope
are we going to
so.
be with ourselves? I know, right? And that's, I think,
I hope so.
a lot of people fear growing and changing because, it is scary. It is an unknown. But if we're not changing, if we're the same person now that we are in 40 years, like, that's scarier to me.
Yeah. And I think it's just enjoying the journey. And like you said, I recall too being told in my 20s and just kind of people invalidating my
Yeah.
experience or feelings, and nobody likes to be patronized. So it's really
Hmm.
just understanding we're all at different stages of the journey. And yes, there could be people in their 20s that have it all together. I know I didn't. I thought I did. And that's
Hmm.
also too, it's like figuring out your perspectives and just understanding like everybody's coming from a different place and we're in a different time, and enjoying the process and just being open to evolution. You're going to go through it whether you like it or not. So you might as well enjoy the ride.
So how do we make that ride easier? Like, how do we, find that confidence in ourselves to really like start to show up like how we want to?
Yeah. I think one of the things, and we're talking about connection and whatnot, and obviously I want people to connect, but I also want them to connect with the right people. And
Mm,
so often I see is that someone's confidence is impacted by the people that they're allowing in their ear, the people that they're
hmm.
allowing in their energy. And there's a very common saying that you're a combination of the five people that you're around the most, and
Yes.
and that's kind of a lie. I mean, someone made it up. It was actually a motivational speaker, ironically, that made that
Yeah.
up, but there is a scientific backup to that. There was a study done where two people that spent a lot of time together, they started having similar brain waves. So they did
Mm,
MRIs and they did testing and found that they had very similar brain waves. So you do have some psychological and scientific backup for that, but I know for even just as an experience, the people that you spend the most time with are the people who affect you the most. And so if you feel yourself having lack of confidence, if you feel yourself living, with a negative mindset about yourself or about others or about life, check who you're spending time with. Check who you're spending, your energy on, and then see if there's some things that need to shift there. Because, I see often where people start to change just because they change their environment and they change the people
mm.
around them.
So does that like mean cutting people out of your life, or does that just mean creating better boundaries? Or, I mean, because that's not that sometimes it's easier said than done. Sometimes you're connected to people that you
Yes.
can't cut out.
Yep. It's funny. I have a whole section of this in my book and I call it the gotta go or gotta change. And so,
Hmm.
you can't get rid of everybody. So,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's someone you work with, sometimes it's family, sometimes it's, and so those can't, some people you can, some people you can choose to say like, this does not serve me anymore. And you can put
Right.
them in the gotta go category, but the gotta change is someone who's in your life permanently or for now. And you can't remove, but like you have to change the way that they're affecting you. And the only thing that
Mm.
you can do, you can control yourself. You can control the boundaries that you set energetically, physically, intellectually, emotionally. You can't change them, but you can
Hmm.
change the way that they affect you. And so that's just something, it's a process, and it's unfortunate that we can't
Yeah.
just get rid of everybody and start over. But no, we have to figure out, how do I make this work in a way that doesn't get in the way of me living the life that I'm meant to lead and feeling confident in myself.
Because someone else's energy really can affect you. Because I've experienced that even just before we got on this call. I had an email from a difficult client, and it's kind of like, it can take me down a rabbit hole. Like it can like really skew your whole day when you allow that energy in. So it's like you have to learn to protect that energy to the best of your ability. But that is very much easier said than done because we are reactive, I think. And then we live in a world that like so much overload. I don't know if it's like we need to have better boundaries, not just with people, but like with how people have access to us.
Yes. Yeah. And that's, we could go into people pleasing. That's probably another
Oh,
hour
yeah.
long conversation of,
Yes.
where we have this, there's so many people I know and I've worked with over the years and spoken to that have this, this, this need to please that they just cannot get a hold of. And,
Yeah.
there's a lot of origins of that and a lot of therapy that could go into figuring out, where it comes from. But they refuse to say no, and then you say yes to soon, and it might not even be a real yes, but it's enough to give people access, and then all of a sudden you realize you have nothing left for yourself. And
Yeah.
so once you get to that point, and a lot of times it does take people getting down to that kind of, level zero of like, I'm at the ground level, I can't go below here, I got to go up from here. And then finally, they start to actually take control and say, no more, this does not work for me.
Yeah. But it's even, I've heard like even talking about these different theories, I've heard the crab in the bucket theory, where, you're trying to change and you're trying to get out of it, but the people around you are actually like pulling you back down, pulling you back into it. It can be like this tug of war to really step into your own truth.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Because there are some people that are very happy with you in whatever state it is, whether
Yes.
they're the people who are taking advantage of your people pleasing, whether it's people who really
Mhm.
like to commiserate with someone who, is a little bit more negative and your positivity is a little intimidating, or it's shining a light on their own issues. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there. It is a sad state, but it's something I think very naturally human, unfortunately, where a lot of people are not rooting for you to win. And I
Yeah.
dislike that immensely, but there's a lot of people, there's a lot of human nature where, we see it with celebrities. We love to see a celebrity fail, and it's the most
I
bizarre
know.
thing. So, it doesn't make that big of a jump from that to, gosh, I don't want to see my friend come out of this hole she's in because I'm in this hole too.
Do you think that's just a way of connecting with someone is that we want to see, we don't want to see people succeed because it makes us shine a light on ourselves of like either what we're not doing or makes us feel worse about ourselves, or like, why can't we cheerlead each other more? What is wrong? Like what has
We can.
changed in society that we don't?
Yeah. We can. And I think it's really, if you are a person who really does enjoy seeing people fall, then it's something to look at yourself, and
Hmm.
figure out. And it's funny, I have, and throughout my life, my relationships, my friendships have definitely evolved. And now I'm surrounded by people who are the just epitome of a cheerleader. Like there's nothing that they wouldn't do to see me succeed. And it's like, that hasn't always been the case. That hasn't
Yeah.
always been the situation. And so it's partially, again, choosing who you spend time with and allowing to affect you, because then it allows you to feel more confident in saying, oh
Mm.
my gosh, we all can win here. We all can
Yeah.
win. There is no reason why we're sitting here hoping that somebody doesn't have the most amazing life. And
Yeah.
so, these are all choices. And I think it's also, some of it's so subconscious. And that's where I don't want to
Mm.
give it an excuse, because I do believe that, we have the ability to change it. But I do think that some of our subconscious programming is already there. So until you are awake, until you say, oh my gosh, I can't
Yeah.
believe I didn't think of it like that. You know, how many times are you talking with someone or, you know, whether it's a client or someone on here or someone or a listener is like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it like that. Well,
Mm-hmm.
until you're kind of opened up to it, then your natural inclination is going to be, you know, whatever your default setting is. And so we got to change those settings, and that's up to you.
Well, I think that awareness and becoming awake and understanding where your subconscious programming comes in, which, you know, can lead us back into like that therapy route. We can go back to our childhood. We could talk about all of that stuff where the root causes of all that. But like you said, even on this show, it seems to be a place that we've talked about. I've come across so many women that are finally out there rooting each other on and cheerleading each
Mm,
other. And I think I'm loving the idea of seeing more of that because you know, if we really want to get onto like that subconscious level and we want to talk about energy and we want to talk about our spirit and our soul and going within and all of that stuff, it is about opening ourselves up. It is about more awareness. It is about abundance, that whole abundance mindset. Another, you know, just as much as authenticity is a hot topic, so is talking about that. But abundance doesn't necessarily mean only money. Like there is an abundance, like there is no limit to who can succeed and be happy in life. And
yep.
once we can shift our mindset to thinking of it that way, then we can get behind other people and cheerlead them and like support them to show up as themselves as opposed to just tear people down. Because I mean, like you said, the celebrity world, I come from that world. I come from, you know, I remember one of my first jobs on Entertainment Tonight, the executive producer at the time said, you know, just make up a story and say it's from Page Six about Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes. And I was just like, I went to journalism school. This is like against all my ethics. And she's like, I don't care. And, you know, it's who am I? I'm a 20-year-old, like, you know, she's screaming at me from the top of her lungs. I'm in the bathroom crying, just kind of trying to come up with some Tomcat story, you know, but it's perpetuated. Like it is perpetuated this, like, let's tear everyone down. And we need to get more into that abundance mindset. Like, no, it is okay for us all to win.
Yes. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Well, the TV world is a whole other. I'll never forget. I had an audition, gosh, years ago, and they were like, "Oh no, she's too genuine." She was saying to me, they're like, "No, no, no," and she's trying too hard to help people, and I'm like, "Wow."
Isn't that sad?
It's just, you know, we have this. Yep, if it bleeds, it leads. So, you know, you
Yes.
really just want to make people cry or sad or angry or whatever it is. You know, the hero story is only on 60 minutes for like 15 minutes of it. The rest of it's still something that's going to make you, you know, have some sort of emotion. And I get it. I just wish our emotions were really just far more positive. But that's a societal change. I feel like trying to get to that stage might take a little bit more, a more shift and just kind of our collective consciousness. And it's an interesting thing when we talk about mindset. And, you know, I notice it so often with people who have, you know, do you have a growth mindset or do you have a fixed mindset? Do you have
Yeah.
that lack or that abundance? You know, all of these things create your success and they create your life and they can create a life that is so much better than if someone's in a bad spot or in this state of misery. You have that power to really just focus on, okay, there's a way to make this better.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing too about mindsets is just how good our brain is at perpetuating a cycle. And so if
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you can't get out of it, it's because your brain is kind of making that hard on you. And, you know, something I used to talk about and use as a reference is like, I think of our brain as a bunch of roads. And so right now you have some super highways built, whatever
Mm-hmm.
your natural inclination that you are now, whether it's positive or negative, whether it's growth or fixed or lack or, you know, abundance. Those are some super highways. They are paved. It is easy to get your
Yeah.
car down the road. And then when you think about switching, you know, if you're trying to go from lack to abundance or from fixed to growth, you know, it feels like a freaking dirt road that you can't get through. You know, you're like in the mud. And so it's okay if it feels really hard in the beginning because you're just paving new roads. You're paving, you know, new synapses in that brain of yours. And so I just want to give people hope of like, if you think it's hard, it's okay because it is in the beginning. And it's just worth it.
Yeah, I'm just imagining like trying to merge from the fast lane to like your off ramp in like 2 miles in
Yeah, you're
LA. Like,
like,
go! But like how how
yeah.
so how do we take those baby steps? Like what can we do to actually start you kind of like rerouting, give ourselves that detour?
Yeah, you know, it's something I I actually have this in my book as well, is that it's journaling is a huge thing, because obviously it's the best way to create that self-awareness of what our thoughts are. And so I used to do this with my clients all the time. That's why I included in the book, where I have them do a negativity journal. And especially like if you're trying to become a more positive person, which I think all of this is, abundance and
Yeah.
lack and whatnot, it's really trying to shift toward the more positive. And so when you have those thoughts of like, I'm not enough, or I don't make enough money, or I'll never get there, or whatever those are, you're able to really track that and figure out, okay, what are the things I'm consistently saying to myself? What are those? Because
Mm-hmm.
we all have those, I know what
Yeah.
mine are, very aware. And so once you're aware of it, you're able to pay attention to it, and then you can start to spin it. And so
Mm.
you become aware, you're writing it down, you're seeing all these kind of patterns, and then you say, I'm going to switch that. What is the antithesis of that comment? What is the other side of it? And use that as a mantra to try to shift whatever that negative aspect was into something positive. And what happens is, it's very interesting, especially when you're tracking it. If you're really paying attention, you're going to start to see it's not instant. It's something that happens
Mm-hmm.
over time. And within a couple of weeks, you're like, wow, I'm having way less negative thoughts. This mantra's starting to shift. I'm writing down less because I'm thinking less negativity. So
Wow.
that's something I've
That's
seen work a lot.
That's interesting. I mean, I always tout the effects of the great effects of journaling as a writer myself, but it's really interesting that you're bringing up the negativity journal, because I actually just spoke to another guest about tapping, and how you tap on the points
Uh,
and you say whatever that story point is, like that negativity. And my first question was to her is like, if we're saying the negativity, if we're saying what's negative, isn't that counterproductive? Because everything like I know and say and hear and have learned from my mentors and readings and teachers is like, if you say something negative out loud, it like 10 times it. So you're also saying like, get that negative energy, get that negativity out, because we can't make that switch to the positive until we release that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's one of my friends, Jess Ortner, is part of the tapping solution. So I'm very
Oh,
familiar
yeah.
with tapping, and she leads it through, like it kind of cycles through where you start with the thought and then you give yourself a new one. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
making these movements because I'm
Yeah.
seeing the tapping throughout the points. But I was like, I'm just sitting here like making circles, but that is not tapping. But yeah, for me, it's really about it's becoming aware. I
Mm.
liken it to, if I go into, I love like going into Marshalls or TJ Maxx, and I
Mm-hmm.
walk in and I want something, and I know what I want. I'm walking out with, shampoo. If I don't know that I'm going in there for shampoo, I'm going to come out with like a chair, a tree, some shampoo, like 7 shirts and a pair of jeans, because there's
Yes.
just so much there and it's all over the place. But like, if you go in there and you're like, I need shampoo today, that's all I need, all of a sudden you're going to go pay attention. You're going to see it. It's going to come out faster. You're going to see it faster because you have an intention set for what you're looking for.
Mm.
It's very similar with our thoughts. When we start to pay attention to them, then we're able to see them to change them. Because if we're just allowing our subconscious to run the show, we'll never know it. So it's really
Mm.
about identification. And that's why I have people journal those negative thoughts and write them down. Because if you don't know what you're saying to yourself, then you don't know how much control you're giving up. And then once you have
Mm.
them down, then you can start to shift them. So
So we're just like really falling back into these patterns of the negativity, no matter how intentioned we are setting out on our day is like a gratitude journal and I'm going to be positive and all these things. Like when things get rough or when we're faced with a scenario that scares us or we're up against a fear or something, we're going to just revert back to what we already know. So we need to draw our attention
yep.
to that so that we can start to shift them, as opposed to just setting our intention in the morning to be like, okay, I'm going to be positive and change all my ideas. No, we need to catch ourselves in the moment.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Starting out your day and saying it's going to be a great day is awesome. And then, your
Yeah.
dog pees on the rug and your kid got sick at school. And like all of a sudden you're like, I hate everybody. So it's
Yeah.
really making sure that throughout the process, it feels a little bit easier. And like I said, it's dirt roads. So if you find yourself oftentimes going to the negative, I get it. It happens. You built those super highways and it's just time to really start to repave them.
So when we do this, when we start to like repave, I can speak too today, repave these highways, does that open us up to getting to know ourselves a little bit better so that we can start to connect more?
100%. Because once you start to look at, the way you think, you look at the way you show up, then you're thinking, oh my gosh, like maybe this is my authentic self right now, but this isn't who I want to be. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe my authentic self is a curmudgeon right now, and that's not really how I want to show up in the world. And so I want to really start to shift it. And so we all have that power, and so I also want to I want to add an asterisk just because I've spent enough time on TikTok and social media to have
Yeah.
been handed this back to me. And it's 100% true where there are cases where it is very difficult, if not impossible, to shift these thoughts without psychotherapy, without
Mm.
medication, without a recognition of neurodivergence and psychological challenges. So I want to always add that asterisk. I think it's the lawyer in me too. It's like, I was like, for the record, that because a lot of times, people will be like, Rachel, I can't do that. And
Yeah.
I can't do that because I have, some sort of challenge that is insurmountable without all of these other things. And so I just want to recognize that as well. But for the most part, so many of us, I think we just live in the default, and our default settings are oftentimes not programmed to our benefit.
Well, and even if you don't have any of those medical issues that we're talking about, which, I actually do. I'm medicated for anxiety and rumination and OCD thoughts. So I get that. I get where people would be coming from. No matter how much I put that effort into it, it's like sometimes I just can't change that thought. I have to, I've gone through
Sure.
therapy for it. So I understand that argument against it. But, where there's a will, there's a way. We can always find, we can find the help to help us facilitate that. But sometimes you're just up against a hard time in your life where it is really hard to get out of, we were talking about earlier, that survival mode or that fight mode, so that it becomes almost impossible to switch that. And I think that's actually interesting how you said sometimes your authentic self could be that curmudgeon, because maybe that's where you are in your life. And maybe that's why we're not showing up authentically, is because we don't like who our authentic self is.
Yeah, it could be 100% where there needs to be a shift before you feel like you can take off the mask. And so but
Mm-hmm.
that's something on self-awareness. And honestly, at the end of the day, there's probably a curmudgeon, group that you could be, if you do want to be a curmudgeon, you could all be friends. It can work for some people. For some people, it might be endearing. I know many curmudgeons and I love them, but, yeah, I think it's all figuring it. There's so much complexity to it, but at the end of the day, it's figuring out what makes you happy.
Mm.
What makes you happy? How do you show up in a way that you feel good about yourself and about who you're putting out in the world? And then everything else kind of falls into place.
So we get to choose who our authentic self is, essentially. Because I guess the way I've always looked at it is our authentic self is just who we are from a spiritual soul level. We're born this way. We have to get in touch with who our spirit wants us to be. But essentially you're saying we actually can, it's not necessarily we're dependent on whoever we came into as. We can choose who that authentic version of ourselves is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And honestly, I think, what I would focus on more is what doesn't feel good. I
Okay.
think there's so much more flexibility in our authenticity and showing up authentically. Just it feels good. And when you really
Mm.
notice that you're not aligned with who you are, is when you feel that drag, when you feel that energy lapse, when you feel that, that exhaustion after interacting with someone. Well,
Yeah.
that's not you. I think and introvertedness aside or social anxiety aside, it's, this could be with your best friend and you walk away and you're like, oh my gosh, I was just pretending. In TV or in the speaking world,
Yeah.
what it means when people are like, you got to be on, you got to be on. Well, on is not always
Yeah.
my authentic self. On is my authentic self times 100, and so it's,
Yeah.
that can be very draining, but we all
Mm-hmm.
have to just pay attention to that to see okay, when did I feel the best leaving that interaction? When did I feel the best leaving, that event? And make sure that we try to show up in that way so that we feel like we are connected to who is our greatest self. Or, we talk about higher selves. It's like when I'm connected to my higher
Yeah.
self, I could go on forever. This is just who I
Yeah.
am, versus I
Yeah.
have to pretend to be perfect. I have to pretend these things. I don't have it in me anymore. I think I'm just tired.
Well, isn't that true? But even being on, you don't have to be on TV to constantly be on. So many of us, if we want to go back
No.
into that people pleasing topic, so many of us feel that we have to be on for a lot of different, in a lot of different areas in our life. And that is exhausting. So, that will lead you down that curmudgeon road. You just can't help it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're depleting yourself because you're pretending to be someone else, when you're depleting yourself because you think you have to elevate or show up at a different level, then it's just, there's no way that you don't end up a little bit resentful and a little bit angry and probably just really, really tired.
So let's find the things that energize us and not make us tired.
Yes.
And then we will start to understand who we are on an authentic level. And so then we'll start to understand what really lights us up and leads us down the path to like our own truth.
Exactly. Sounds like a good route to take.
Well, thank you so much. How do we get in touch with you if we want to work with you? Where do we get your book? Where do we hear you speak? I know you talk on this topic a lot and so much more.
I do. I'm Rachel DeAlto everywhere, so all social media, and my website's racheldealto.com. Books on Amazon and in stores, and speaking. Most of the time I speak for corporations and associations, so often it's a private event, but I would love to connect with anybody out there in the world if they happen upon one of those as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much, Rachel. And it was so great talking to you today.
Thank you.
And that's it for today's Intentional Living with Courtney Myers. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Rachel DeAlto, for such a great conversation all about connection, authenticity, and giving ourselves the grace to change, because we all have that in us to change our mindset, to change our relationship, or to change how we show up in the world. If you want to follow along with Rachel and her journey or get her book, I'll put all the information of how to get in touch with her in the show notes below. And as always, you can find Intentional Living with Courtney Myers and Intentional Media on our website at CourtneyMyers.com, where you'll find courses, books, and everything else we have coming up. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.